How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Boileye Hobby Time. As soon as I'm done cleaning off this hobby mat, I'll explain what I'm making today. I found this N1 Starfighter at my local hobby store well over a year ago, and I didn't know what to do with it. My original idea was something spinning, because that's a good trick, but all these other boxes changed my mind. I've made a lot of dioramas involving Star Wars vehicles over the years, and in most cases, they're in exactly the setting you'd expect. A Star Wars setting. But for a reason I'll explain a little later in the video, I decided not to do that with these two ships. And it was kind of a fun break for me, actually. Along with the AMT kit, I also found the brand new Bandai Souped Up Mando version, which happens to be in the exact same scale as the AMT kit. I was more excited to assemble Mando's N1, so I started with that. In case you're not familiar with the N1 Starfighter, it was first introduced in Episode 1, flown by young Anakin, or Little Annie, if you will. He blows up the Separatist mothership in this thing. And the N1 is seen a couple more times through the prequels and the Clone Wars, but didn't really make a significant reappearance as a main character ship until Mando Season 2.5. After Mando's big ship, the Razor Crest, gets exploded, he's moping around looking for a new one on Tatooine, and he finds this old N1 Starfighter. And then Exhibit shows up and says, "Hey Mando, what are some of your favorite things?" And Mando says, "Beskar, weapons, speed." And Exhibit says, "I got you, bro." And then there's a short build montage, and then Mando has this nice shiny Starfighter. Actually, all this stuff with Exhibit isn't shown explicitly on camera, but I'm just assuming that that's what happened. With the ships assembled, it was now time to figure out the layout for the diorama, and the question was whether both of them would fit on one sheet of MDF. The alternative was to use 2 sheets of MDF, but the problem with that is that I wasn't sure I had enough to fill out that large of a diorama. I couldn't make a good decision on that until I knew exactly how much I had to work with, so I began assembling the little garage kit that I got from Mini Art. And now to the reason why I decided to make a garage diorama with these ships. It's actually because both of the ships were in 1:48 scale, and I looked through my stuff, and the only 1:48 scale stuff that I had were some World War II soldiers and this garage kit. So rather than going out and looking for other Star Wars stuff in the correct scale, I decided I would just combine it all into something unexpected and not as serious as my usual content. I've said it before, but I love working with Mini Art kits. The detail is always super clean and very satisfying. And in the end, I did not have enough stuff to fill out both of these MDF sheets, so I did condense it down to one. And in order to make that layout work, I decided that one of these needed to be hoisted in the air so that they would overlap on the footprint. So I broke out this 1:35 scale hoist frame, which is a little larger than 1:48 scale. But because of that, it actually looks a little more realistic to have this lifting a whole ship off the ground rather than just an engine block. One single chain's still probably not sufficient for this, realistically, but looks a little more passable. With that, the ships and the garage implements were all done, and the next thing to do was to break out some 1:48 scale mechanics. This is a Tamiya World War II airstrip crew. 2 of the guys came actually doing some work action poses, and then this other guy came in a critical of the work that's happening pose. One of the other guys that came in working pose is carrying some kind of munition, but I swapped that out for a large pipe, and this other guy has a paint sprayer. Along with that, I coiled up a little wire, connected it to the compressor, and he's good to go. After the figures had been sorted out, it was time to glue everything in place. Rather than trying to fiddle with all of these individual pieces on their own and paint them separately and then assemble later, I decided to just glue it all together and then face the potential added difficulty of painting later on, which in my experience is honestly not that bad. Actually, assembling this garage was probably the most fun part of this entire build for me. After the workbench, the shelves, and all of the assorted little bits and containers had been glued down, I glued down the hoist frame, and then I removed the ships and the people because they are going to be painted separately. The last thing to do before painting was to add a bit of texture. I broke out some Tamiya gray putty. I thinned that with lacquer thinner, so it could be easily stippled over the entirety of the MDF surface to make it look a little bit more like concrete. I had some extra thinned putty that I didn't want to waste, so I made a spur-of-the-moment decision to give one of the ships the appearance of rusty steel. Figured that if we were already breaking the bounds of realistic Star Wars content, we might as well just go crazy. I left the putty to dry and then prepped my minis by gluing them to some painting handles. After that, it was time to start priming. The rusty steel N1 got an oxide primer. Not that that's going to be visible in the end, but I thought it would be a funny thing to do. And I swapped that out with a matte black primer, and I primed everything aside from Mando's N1. I had another plan for his ship, which was a bad plan, but I didn't know that yet. After the figures and the compressor had been primed black, I loaded up some chipping medium into the airbrush, and I covered Mando's whole ship. This was a noob mistake. I applied the chipping medium over top of a smooth, unprimed plastic surface. Let's just say that might come back to bite me. My hope was to preserve the original color and have that show through in the end, because I really do like the finish that the ship came with, but yeah, we'll see how that goes. The next step was to bring in some light gray and build up the highlights on all of the black primed surfaces. I'll be painting most of the base colors with contrast paints, so establishing this first step of building up the light values was key. After that light gray zenithal, it was back to the imminent disaster that is the chromed out N1. I gave it a base layer of desert khaki and then moved back to my oxide primed N1 and began layering up the paint in such a way as to create the base tones for a rusty steel ship. I played around for a little bit until I settled on a nice dark steel base color. Then I applied a chipping medium followed by some splotchy white. I'm loosely following a technique I have seen Night Shift use in some of his videos, which is not quite to the same level of realism as he accomplishes. But I am happy with the results that I ended up with. I painted and chipped, followed by a few brushed on layers of warm, rusty washes. With the ship looking relatively rusty, I applied one final layer of chipping medium, and then I masked the front of the ship and applied a coat of gray-blue, which is the paint scheme for the ship. And then I chipped that away, and it went perfectly. The success of this ship's paint job actually gave me a really nice false sense of security and indestructibility. In my head, I was an absolute pro with chipping paint, and nothing could stop me. The final thing to paint on this Nubian starfighter was the upholstery and, of course, the droid. With that, my rusty N1 was done, and it was time to move on to the other one. My second mistake in this process was to do something that I thought was really clever and lightly spray some water over the whole ship with an airbrush before I started chipping. You are supposed to get it a little damp before you chip, but before I knew it, the paint had basically peeled off entirely. The only place paint was left was where I didn't want it, which was not ideal. But I guess the feeling of having already ruined the ship gave me some freedom to not care about what I did next. So I just began trying different things to fix it, starting with an oil wash. And when that didn't work, I used a dark pigment powder, which actually got into the recesses and tinted the khaki to a nicer brown. And at this point, it wasn't looking as bad as it had been, so I decided not to test my luck, just leave it slightly dirty. I can apply some dust later with the airbrush, and I could start working on the base. I broke out the full Roy G. Biv of my oil washes, and at this point I was feeling a little extra uncautious, so I went full abstract impressionism on the garage floor. I know there's some of you out there saying that's not what a garage floor looks like. Not to worry, after dabbing with a paper towel, we're left with a LaCroix level of saturation that I think looks pretty good. Next, it was time for the usual oil and ambiguous liquid stains that you'd find on a mechanic shop floor. I'll add a unifying color at the end with the airbrush, but before that I broke out my speed paints and started picking out all the individual elements. I wet blended the paints right on the thing I was painting so that nothing looked too clean or perfect to begin with. And then with all of the base colors down, it was time to start the highlighting. This step really helps bump up the contrast and make each of those individual elements pop. And in case you didn't notice, I did off camera add that unifying layer of dust from the airbrush, which I was hoping some of the overspray would get on the lower parts of all of the furniture and the barrels. And I think it did a good job of tying this whole piece together. After wrapping up the paint job on the garage, it was time to paint the men. So like I said earlier, these are supposed to be World War II field mechanics or something. They were from a box of German field mechanics, but honestly, what they're wearing doesn't look much different than what you'd see in just a normal mechanic shop. And this guy with the leather jacket, I mean, that's a cool jacket. He could be anybody's great uncle. And this compressor right here could be any make and model. So I'm going to say that this mechanic shop is in Nebraska. And the guy in the leather jacket is a collector of rare N1 starfighters. And he brings them into this mechanic shop who fixes them up for him. Or something like that. I don't know. After the painting was done, it was time for final assembly. Once everything and everyone were in place, I called it good. That is it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Huge shout out as always to my patrons. You guys are the best. Have an awesome week, everyone. I'll see you next time.